Welcome to Last Minute Lecture. This free chapter overview is designed to help students review and understand key concepts. These summaries supplement, not replace, the original textbook and may not be redistributed or resold. For complete coverage, always consult the official text.
Have you ever noticed that to just hold a moderately heavy object in your hand, your bicep muscle has to pull upward with enough force to lift like 500 apples?
Oh, yeah. It's completely wild.
Yeah.
I mean, we usually think of physics as this tidy, sterile world of frictionless ramps and perfectly straight lines.
Right.
But the reality happening inside your own arm is much more chaotic and honestly a lot more fascinating.
Yeah, it really highlights how the simple rules of cause and effect, a push or pull producing a motion, how they layer together to create incredibly complex systems.
Definitely. When you step outside or even just lift a coffee cup, you're dealing with multiple forces, all fighting for dominance at the exact same time.
And that is exactly what we're unpacking today. Welcome to this deep dive.
So glad you're here with us.
Consider this your personalized one-on-one tutoring session to really master the invisible pushes and pulls that govern everything around us.
We are drawing our insights directly from Chapter 4 of the Cambridge International AS and A-Level Physics coursebook, covering forces, vectors, and moments.
We're going to break down how forces combine, how they tear apart, what makes things spin, and what it actually takes for an object to reach a state of perfect balance. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, so to make sense of the physical chaos around us, we really have to start with a foundational rule. Force is a vector quantity.
Meaning it's not just an amount of push or pull, right? It has a very specific direction.
Exactly. When multiple forces hit an object simultaneously, you can't just tally up the numbers like you're counting loose change.
Right, you can't just say 5 plus 5.
No, you have to figure out their combined physical effect, which physicists call the resultant force.
Okay, let's picture a tennis ball falling through the air. You have gravity pulling it straight down, let's say, with 1.0 newtons of force.
But it's not falling in a vacuum.
Right. Air resistance is pushing back up against it with, say, 0.2 newtons. So they're fighting in the exact same line, but in perfectly opposite directions.
And to resolve that fight mathematically, you have to adopt a strict sign convention.
Which means you actively decide which direction is the positive one.
Yes. So if we declare downwards as positive, because, that's the primary motion of the fall, gravity is a positive 1.0 newtons.
And the air resistance, because it's fighting that fall, becomes a negative 0.2.
Exactly. So the math just leaves us with positive 0.8 newtons.
And because the answer is positive, we know the overall resultant force is definitively pointing down.
That sign convention saves you from total confusion when things get complicated. But the real world rarely operates in just one straight line.
No, it definitely doesn't.
Imagine switching from a dense tennis ball to a really light shuttlecock falling on a windy day. Now, gravity's pulling it straight down, but the wind is blasting it horizontally.
Okay, right. So gravity pulls straight down with 8.0 newtons of force. The wind pushes it to the right with 6.0 newtons.
Yep.
They are acting at perfect right angles to each other. How do we visually and mathematically combine a horizontal push and a vertical pull?
Well, we use the head-to-tail drawing method. Think of it like drawing a map of the forces.
Okay.
You draw a horizontal arrow representing the wind. Then, starting exactly from the tip of that first arrow, you draw a vertical arrow pointing straight down for gravity.
Got it. So you're essentially tracing the top and right sides of a rectangle.
Exactly. And the final resultant force is found by drawing a straight line from your absolute starting point to your absolute ending point.
Which means, because the forces were perpendicular, you've just drawn the hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle.
You got it. And since the sides are 6 and 8, it forms a classic 3-4-5 geometric triangle.
Oh, nice. That makes our diagonal resultant force exactly 10 newtons.
Right. But because force is a vector, we also need its direction.
So using basic trigonometry on those sides, it works out to an angle of 53 degrees below the horizontal.
Perfect. That 10 Newton 53-degree arrow perfectly replaces the other two individual forces. It's the single line the shuttlecock will actually travel along as it blows away.
Okay, wait. I want to picture a scenario where something isn't falling or blowing away.
Sure.
The source material brings up a spider hanging from a single silk thread, getting blown sideways by the wind.
Ah, yes.
The spider is just hanging there, totally stationary, but it has 3 distinct forces acting on it.
Let's list them.
Gravity pulling it down, the wind pushing horizontally, and the tension of the silk thread pulling it up and diagonally.
Right.
If the spider isn't moving, what happens to our vector map?
What's fascinating here is what happens when you draw those 3 force arrows head to tail.
Okay, let's visualize it.
First, you draw the diagonal tension, then from its tip, the downward weight, and then from that, tip the horizontal wind.
Wait, the tip of the third arrow lands exactly on the starting point of the first arrow.
It does. It makes a completely closed triangle.
A perfectly closed loop. Wow.
Yeah, because the arrows end exactly where they began, the resultant force is mathematically 0. There is no leftover push or pull.
So the forces are completely neutralizing each other, keeping the spider in a state of equilibrium.
Exactly. Whenever you hear equilibrium or see an object that isn't accelerating, you know its force arrows will always form a closed shape.
Okay, so we've established how forces balance out perfectly for a hanging spider. But what happens when gravity is pulling you straight down, but the ground beneath you is slanted?
Oh, the forces can't just cancel out so simply anymore.
Right.
That requires taking vectors apart, a process called resolving forces.
Resolving forces.
If combining forces is like snapping puzzle pieces together to see the whole picture, resolving forces is breaking a single complex force into independent pieces to see which specific part is doing the heavy lifting.
Gotcha.
The golden rule here is that any single force can be split into 2 perpendicular components.
Let's visualize this with a cart or a trolley sitting on a sloped ramp, and we'll ignore friction to keep the physics clean.
Sounds good.
The trolley has weight pulling it straight down toward the center of the earth. It also has the ramp itself pushing back against it.
Yes, that is the normal contact force, and it pushes away at exactly 90 degrees to the surface of the ramp.
Okay, so we know the trolley is going to accelerate down the slope, but think about the weight vector.
It's pointing straight down, not down the slanted ramp.
Right. So to figure out why the trolley moves sideways along the slope, we have to resolve that vertical downward weight into components.
Exactly. We want to find out how much of that straight down gravity is actually tugging parallel to the slanted floor.
Let's say the ramp is raised at an angle, we'll call it theta.
Okay, by simple geometry, the angle between the straight vertical weight arrow and the slanted surface of the ramp is 90 degrees minus theta.
Right, because of the right angle triangle it forms with the ground.
Yep. So if we want the component of weight pulling parallel to the slope, we multiply the total weight by the cosine of that angle.
So weight times the cosine of 90 minus theta.
Which mathematically is identical to the sine of theta.
Oh, that's clean. So the actual force dragging the trolley down the ramp is simply the weight multiplied by the sine of the ramp's angle.
Exactly. And this raises an important question. Does the normal contact force, the one pushing perpendicularly away from the ramp, does it help push the trolley down the slope?
Well, if I think about that physically, the normal force is pushing perfectly away from the surface. It's not pushing down the ramp and it's not pushing up the ramp.
Right.
It's completely sideways to the downward motion.
And the math reflects that physical reality perfectly. The angle between that perpendicular normal force and the downward slope is exactly 90 degrees.
Okay.
If you want its component down the slope, you multiply the force by the cosine of 90 degrees. But the cosine of 90 is 0.
Oh, wow. So the normal force has absolutely 0 effect on the trolley's acceleration down the ramp.
0. This proves a really vital rule of physics. Components that are at 90 degrees to each other are completely independent.
That makes so much sense. A push in one direction has absolutely no effect on motion perpendicular to it.
Exactly. Now, up to this point, we've been treating falling shuttlecocks, hanging spiders, and sliding trolleys as if they were single microscopic dots.
Yeah, we've pretended all their mass exists in one tiny location.
Which is a necessary illusion to learn the basics, but real objects are messy. You and I and everyday objects have weight distributed across our entire volume.
Right. An arm weighs something, a leg weighs something else.
So to bridge the gap between simple math and messy reality, physicists use a concept called the center of gravity.
The center of gravity.
It's defined as the single point where you can consider all the weight of the object to act.
It is a brilliant simplification, and the physics material actually illustrates this with the biomechanics of a high jumper.
I love this example.
Picture an athlete midair, curving backwards over the bar in a deep arch, and the Fosbury flop.
Yeah, it looks chaotic. Arms and legs are flailing. The back is severely arched. Tracking the physics of every individual limb seems impossible.
But if you track their center of gravity, it's not a chaotic mess at all.
No, because of the severe backward curve of the jumper's posture, a fascinating thing happens. Their center of gravity actually shifts outside of their physical body.
Wait, seriously?
Yes. It hovers in the empty space just below the small of their arched back.
Wait, the point where all their weight mathematically acts isn't even touching them?
Correct. And while the athlete's body contorts over the bar, that invisible hovering point traces a perfectly smooth, predictable, parabolic arc through the air, completely undisturbed.
That is wild. The lings just rotate around it.
Exactly.
It makes me wonder, though, how do you actually find that invisible balancing point on something that isn't perfectly symmetrical? Say you have a random, irregularly shaped, flat piece of cardboard. You can't just measure the middle.
There's actually a highly tactile, physical way to find it.
Yeah.
You take that weird piece of cardboard, a lamina it's called, poke a hole near one edge, stick a pin through it, and let it hang freely.
Okay, because of gravity, it's going to swing and settle, so the heaviest part is at the very bottom.
Yes, it will naturally rest with its center of gravity at the lowest possible point, exactly vertically below the pin.
Okay.
Then you hang a weighted string, a plumb line, from that exact same pin. Gravity pulls the string perfectly straight down.
So you basically trace a line down the cardboard along that straight string.
Exactly.
And you know for a fact the center of gravity is somewhere along that pencil mark.
Yep. Then you take the pin out, poke it through a totally different spot on the cardboard, let it hang, and drop the plumb line again.
And you draw a second line.
And the exact spot where those two pencil lines intersect that crosshair is the center of gravity.
Oh, that's so cool. You could balance the whole piece of cardboard on the tip of your finger right at that intersection.
It works every single time. And pinpointing that exact center is crucial for understanding what happens when a force misses it.
Right. Because if a force pushes directly in line with an object's center of gravity, the object just slides forward in a straight line.
But what if the force is applied off-center? Or what if the object is bolted down at a hinge?
Then it doesn't slide. It twists. It turns.
Exactly. In physics, this turning effect is called the moment of a force.
The technical definition is the force multiplied by the perpendicular distance of the pivot from the line of action of the force. The measurement unit is the Newton meter.
The word perpendicular is the catch there. If you push a door open by hitting it at a perfect 90-degree angle, the distance is just the width of the door.
But if you push the door at an awkward glancing angle, you aren't getting the full twisting effect.
Right. To calculate the moment at an awkward angle, you have two choices, and both rely on trigonometry.
Okay, what's the first one?
You can figure out the shortest perpendicular distance from the hinge to the invisible line your push is traveling along, which works out to the physical distance multiplied by the sine of the angle.
Or you can do what we did with the trolley on the ramp, resolve your pushing force into components.
Exactly.
You find the component of your push that is perfectly perpendicular to the door, which is the force multiplied by the sine of the angle, and multiply that by the physical distance to the hinge.
And honestly, the math doesn't care which method you use. Force times distance times sine theta gives you the exact same turning effect.
Good to know. And to stop things from spinning out of control, we rely on the principle of moments.
Right. For an object to be perfectly balanced, the sum of all the clockwise moments must exactly equal the sum of the anticlockwise moments.
Think of seesaw. A 20-Newton kid sitting 2 meters from the middle creates a turning effect of 40 Newton meters.
Yep.
To balance them, a 40-Newton adult only needs to sit 1 meter away. 40 times 1 equals 40. The moments cancel out.
That brings us back to the human arm, which operates on this exact principle.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Your elbow joint acts as the pivot of a seesaw.
Okay, visualize this.
Imagine you are holding a heavy bag, let's call it 40 newtons of weight in your hand. That hand is roughly 0.35 meters from your elbow.
On top of that, your actual forearm bones and tissue weigh about 20 newtons, acting at their center of gravity, which is 0.15 meters from the elbow.
Both the bag and your arm are being pulled downward by gravity. They are both trying to wrench your arm open in a clockwise rotation.
If you multiply the 40 Newton bag by its distance and the 20 Newton arm by its distance, you get a combined turning effect of 17 Newton meters, pulling down.
Okay, so to stop your arm from dropping, your bicep muscle has to pull up, creating an anti-clockwise moment of exactly 17 Newton meters.
But here is the massive evolutionary catch. Your bicep doesn't connect to your hand.
No, it attaches to your forearm bone incredibly close to the elbow pivot, just 0.04 meters away.
It has virtually no leverage. Because its perpendicular distance from the pivot is so microscopic, the force it generates has to be astronomically high to compensate.
Wow.
If you divide the 17 newton meters of required turning effect by that tiny 0.04 meter distance, you find the bicep has to pull with a force of 425 newtons.
That's insane. The course material actually points out that it can take roughly 500 newtons of internal force just to hold your arm steady against a moderate load.
It's a huge number.
500 newtons is the force required to lift 500 apples. Your bicep is lifting 500 apples just so your hand can hold 40 apples.
It is a staggering mechanical disadvantage. Biology essentially trades strength for speed and range of motion.
Right.
Because the bicep attaches so close to the joint, a tiny contraction of the muscle whips the hand through a massive arc. You lose mechanical efficiency, but you gain the ability to, say, throw a baseball.
Makes sense. Okay, so moving on, a couple is basically just a fancy physics term for grabbing something from both sides and twisting it.
Pretty much.
We've seen single forces push things in straight lines. We've seen off-center forces twist things around pivots. What happens when you have two equal forces pushing in perfectly opposite directions?
You create a specific mechanical arrangement known as a couple. A couple is a pair of forces that are equal in size, parallel to each other, opposite in direction, and separated by a distance.
Picture the steering wheel of a car. Your left hand grips the left side, pushing upwards with 15 newtons of force.
And your right hand grips the right side, pulling downwards with 15 newtons. Let's say the steering wheel is 0.40 meters across.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, look at the linear pushes first. 15 newtons up, 15 newtons down.
They perfectly cancel each other out. The resultant linear force is 0. Your steering wheel doesn't rip off the dashboard and fly upward into the roof.
But the wheel is obviously turning. It's not sitting still.
Right, because while the linear force is 0, the rotational force is not. A couple creates a pure turning effect.
Okay.
Because there is no overall push or pull, a couple produces purely rotational acceleration. In physics, we call the turning effect of a couple its torque.
And finding that torque is incredibly elegant. You don't have to calculate the two sides separately.
No, you don't.
You just multiply one of the 15 Newton forces by the total perpendicular distance between your hands. 15 times the 0.40 meter diameter gives a pure torque of 6.0 Newton meters.
The beauty of a couple is that its torque doesn't depend on where the pivot is. It is a pure rotational value.
It's nice.
Which perfectly sets up the grand finale of the material. We can finally state the two absolute, non-negotiable conditions for an object to be in a state of ultimate equilibrium.
The final rules of balance, what are they?
Condition 1. The resultant force acting on the object must be perfectly 0. That ensures there is no linear acceleration. It won't slide or fall.
Okay. And the second?
Condition 2. The resultant moment must be 0. That ensures there is no rotational acceleration. It won't start spinning.
So if and only if an object satisfies both conditions, it is truly in equilibrium.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? Let's summarize our deep dive today. We took the chaotic pushes and pulls of the real world and gave them rules.
We did.
We learned that stacking vector arrows into a closed loop proves an object isn't accelerating. We discovered why pulling things apart into perpendicular components reveals that a perpendicular push has absolutely no effect on downward motion.
We found out that an athlete's balancing point can literally hover in empty space, and we revealed the staggering biological torque your bicep exerts just to hold a bag of groceries.
And finally, we isolated pure rotation with couples, defining the absolute laws of equilibrium. You now have the toolkit to look at a bridge, a falling leaf, or your own arm, and decode the invisible architecture of forces keeping it all together.
It really changes how you see the world.
It really does. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, drawing directly from the rule that turning effect requires perpendicular distance.
This is a good one.
The physics material notes that any force passing straight through a pivot has a distance of exactly 0, meaning it creates 0 turning effect.
The math absolutely insists on it.
So imagine standing in front of a massive, incredibly heavy bank vault door.
Okay.
If you put your hands directly on the solid metal hinges and push perfectly inward toward the pivot, no matter how much force you exert, even if you have the mechanical strength of an industrial bulldozer, that door will never swing open. Your applied torque is mathematically 0. It is a profound reminder that in physics, and maybe in life, where you apply your effort is just as important as how much effort you apply.
That is beautifully said.
On behalf of both of us, a warm thank you from the Last Minute Lecture team for diving into this physics material with us.